we're going to be talking about JavaScript a lot, so be warned. Hi, I'm Marta and this is NotEnoughTECH, and we're today talking about the sixth part of the NodeRED for beginners, and for today we've got more about function nodes. So I'm gonna teach you how to actually code in JavaScript, because this is the language of the function node, and I'm gonna get you through the basics. Bear in mind, this is not a tutorial to JavaScript at all. We're just going to look at few things, few concepts that you should learn before you start coding in or writing your own code in a function node. Now, few disclaimers. First of all the links in the descriptions for this tutorial written part, so you could grab all the codes as well. And second of all, you should watch data processing and you should watch JSON, getting started with JSON. Those two videos I've made, or article and a video I've made earlier on, to be on the subject. Now, obviously, if you watch the series from the beginning, you should have no problem understanding what we're going to do and what are the concepts I'm about to show you. So with that in mind, let's get started.
So I've got my NodeRED window open, and most of the time we're going to talk about the function node, and the set it goes as follow. I've got some sort of inject node in the different modes, then I've got function node and the debug node. For this example, I've also have a set node, as I'm just going to show you that most of the NodeRED functionality can be replicated with flows itself. The function node is just kind of to build on that and introduce more complex behaviors as well that would be hard to replicate. So for example, if you're gonna let me just open firstly the change node. So you see I'm setting a payload to this is a payload, so I'm just going to insert that, and obviously it'll give me a change node which with the payload insert this is a payload, and we can do it exactly the same with this line of code. So message payload equals to this is payload, and then return the message object. So this is just an example that both nodes in this case do exactly the same thing, and you would be able to set a lot of the things with the complex node flow solutions, and the function node will save you a lot of time and space in your flow. As you can see, this is from a node change, this is payload, and this is from the function node, this is payload as well. So that's just to showcase why would you use function node. Now, the first example I've got in here, we are going to be talking about setting variables. And setting variables is quite easy. What you have to do is just set a specific variable. So we're going to start either with let or with variable. You can also use a constant. However, due to how NodeRED works, constant isn't really much of a use, because those variables are going to be destroyed once the message exits the node. So there is a difference between let and var. Let is a little bit younger construct, and basically it respects the scope of the variable, while variable it's available across entire function node. And to be honest, for most of the cases you would use var as a way of setting variables. So we can set a variable which is, let's say, test, and we can equal it. Now if you want to have a string, you're gonna put it into double quotation, or you can use single quotation marks. If you want to have an integer, you can just type in number or your float, that's fine. You can also have a special variable, so there's boolean, true or false, and also you can have object, which we talked about JSON, so you can have your object inserted as well in here like this, and then object inside. And lastly, you can have a null, or you can have undefined. The difference between undefined and null is when the variable has no value, undefined when the variable never had a value, so it never been assigned any other value, or the value got destroyed. Now, if you're setting anything, let me just go back. You make your you do it in two ways. First of all, you're doing your the variable declaration. So you've declared the variable, and the variable right now is undefined, and then you can set the variable. Let me just finish the statement, and then you can set the variable to some value. That's some value. So we have some value here, guys. And this variable right now, it has been defined and assigned. As you can see below, we can actually skip this and we can just do this. So we can skip one line. So let's do this like this. And that will work for us as well. So we can define the variable and assign the value to it in a single step, in a single line. So this is something to remember, and obviously that could be a null, that can be a number, and that could be many other things. So that's basically how you do it. Now, when speaking about assigning things to these variables, if you're going to use the variable syntax, so var or let, these variable values going to be destroyed once the message is going to be returned. So if you want to preserve them, you have to offload them to something else. So if you want to do it as a message payload, all you have to do, we have a test value. So you just type in test, and that's it. Right now, this, when I deploy this, you'll see that the message is test. Some value. So right now I've offloaded this, got destroyed, the variable got saved as a message payload. Now if you can also save it as a, obviously, message topic, etc. Both those variables aren't saved via message object. They're going to be destroyed, and there's a way to save these values and make them available. Now I've talked about it in the data processing, so I'm just going to copy and paste quickly how to do it, and I'm not going to go through it. If you want to know more about the context, flow, and global variables, just refer to it in the data processing part of the tutorial. So if you want to get your variable set in a space in here, so save it in a function. This is going to be destroyed once the function is executed. Well, it's not going to be destroyed itself. It's going to be saved for that function node itself, but it's not going to be available outside of that node function. So if that node runs again, it'll have access to whatever stored in that variable. So you can set that variable, or you can get messages from this variable. Now, if you want that variable to be available via from all the nodes, then you're gonna have to do it with the flow. So basically the same syntax, we just start with flow set, then the variable name and the value, and then if you want to recall it, just open a variable, instantiate the variable, and get flow.get and the variable name. That's it. And lastly, if you want to have a global variable, is exactly the same. You just use the name global, and what you do with it, you basically, this is available across all the tabs. So you have all the tabs in here, and this variable can be used in the different tabs. So that's your that's how you save the variables and values if you're not going to save it and pass it over as a part of your message object. While we're still speaking about the variables, we talk about one more ways of passing strings. So basically, I've instantiated a variable, and that's variable x, and I've set the value to extra. Now, if you're gonna use the backticks, those are the ones on the this English keyboard in the corner. So those are not a single quotation; those are backticks. Then the entire string is interpreted until the dollar and curly bracket symbol, and then ends with the curly bracket symbol. This is where you can enter your value or different like math equation inside without destroying the string. So basically what's going to happen in here, usually if I use the double quotations like here, that would have just that would be a literal string. So I'll have, this is the message that has an $, bracket x, bracket value. But if I use the backticks, I'll show you what happened. Let's clear this and let's press true. And when I do it, you have this message. This is a message that has an extra value. So that extra from the variable x has been inserted here because of that syntax here. So that's another thing that you can do with strings and variables. When talking about variables, we should talk about different operations, you can perform it, and all the mathematical expressions can be used in JavaScript, so that's not a problem. One of the things that you should remember is that the plus sign, it's also used to join strings. So I've got an example in here when the variable x is a string, so this is not a number, this is a string 10, and the y character is 6. Now if they both were integers, so 6 and 10, I could just add them together like this, x plus y, and that would give me the number 16. But in this case I get 106. This is because the value of 10, that was a string, and then we just added, which means we joined another value, which is 6, so it's 106. Now this happens when one of the values in here, one of the variables, is an integer. So if you've got integer, that's what's going to happen. If you would have two numbers in here, you would get the value 16. So another useful thing is to learn how to translate the data type into a different data type. And I'm just going to focus on string and to number. So you have two commands. Now, because we have a math equation in here, what we can do, we can translate the value to a number. So what I have to do is just create a new variable. And that variable, it's going to equal a number, which is a function, and then x. X is here. So our x is 10 strings, 10 strings going to be translated, and then all I have to do instead of x, I need to change it for number value. And if I deploy this one now, we should have a proper math equation. So I'm just going to keep this one on 6 so you could see. And this time we have an integer, and which is blue, and it's 16. So we've successfully translated the string into the number. Now if you want to do other way around, so let's just cancel this out. And let's translate both to strings, so we could receive exactly 106 again. So what we want to do is have this time we're translating this statement, so our 6, and we want to have a string value. So we have in here our x, and we have in here string value. And then let's deploy this, and that should give us 106 again. So I can just delete this. When I press it, it's 106 again, because those two values got joined. So I've got the 10 and joined by 6, so that's 106. Now if you notice, you've got multiple outputs, and the best way to test it is to assign something to it. So I've got a flow ready for you, so I don't have to create this. What happens in here, I have two debug messages, one for message 1, so this is top output, one for message 2, this is a bottom output, and then I'm just passing a true or false to execute this. So what's going to happen right now, for each message, I'm assigning an object, which is going to have a string, and the string is basically message to the output 1, message to the top output, message to the bottom output. And then if you increase the number of outputs in here, that's going to increase in your node as well. You're going to create instances, well, that's going to be an array basically, and I have an array. If you read the JSON tutorial, you know how array looks like, and I have an array in here with two elements, one is message 1 and one is message 2, and that's what I created. And now when I execute this, I'm gonna get two values, one going through message 1, which is the top output, and that's the correct output, and one going through message 2, which is the bottom output. As you can see, I had two of them, and that's just connected in here. So that's how you assign the values to different outputs. There are a few more things that you can actually do with this, and one of the things that we're going to do is the conditional statements. If you know conditional statements a bit, then obviously you can use them in here. You can use equals, you can use greater than, smaller than, greater than, equal, and etc. And I'm not going to go through all conditional statements. Feel free just to look them up. They all use the same syntax in here, so you can just replace the signs and all is going to be okay and just make more sense in terms of how you pass the values. But in this example, what I'm doing is I'm making a statement with a single if and one else, and then the statement will return to the correct output. So if it's returning to a first output, basically in my array I'm selecting the correct first element of this array, and the second was just empty. And if it's returning to the second output, I'm just setting first element of the array empty, and then just second is populated. And that way I can each time just set my payload to a different value. So if I deploy payload, I'll get this was okay for the first statement, and if I not deploy payload, I get something else. So let's test this and let's clear this up. So I'm deploying payload, and this was okay for the first statement. So they went this way, and ended up in here. Now, if I want to end it up in here, I'm deploying not payload, and I've got in front, it's wrong. So as you can see, you can totally use this as a switch node, and you could include more statements in there and process some other code, so you save yourself a time and save yourself a space on your flow. So another ways of comparing values is to use a switch statement. And there is a switch node that you could use. However, if you want to process this inside of the function node, you can do the switch statement in here. And basically the switch statement will check the value of the payload. And then if the payload value is 1, it's a case named 1, then the payload is going to be set option 1. And that's going to return to the first output. Case 2, when the message is 2, the payload is going to be set to option 2, and the message is going to go to the second output, etc, etc. And then the last one is default, so if the case is anything else than 1, 2 or 3, it's going to go through the fourth option, and the payload is going to be all the values, and it's going to be passed over through the fourth output. So let's test it out. So if it's 1, I should get option 1, and I get option 1. If it's 2, option 2. If it's 3, option 3. If it's 4, all the values, and as you can see, that corresponds with the nodes itself. So that's your switch statement, and that's how you use it, or you can just use the switch node instead. We know that this is a function node, but inside you can have a smaller functions as well. So in this example, I'm going to pass two values. A payload is going to be 2, and that's a string, not a number. And topic is going to be 3, and that's a string as well, not a number. And I'm going to write a function to add both together. So basically I've got a function called calculateSum, and I'm going to pass two parameters inside. One is x and one is y. So I want to add two numbers, and each time this number is going to be x and y. Now, because I don't know whether the number is going to be strings or they're going to be numbers, I want to make sure they are numbers. I could perform a correct operation. So I'm setting variable 1, which is a number from x, and variable 2, which is a number from y. And then I'm just adding them together. So variable 1 and plus variable 2, and then I'm passing the result. And the way to obtain the data is I'm setting a new payload to a function. So that's going to be this function here. And I'm passing x and y. And in my case, x is a payload and y is a topic. So when I press this and deploy it, I'm going to have a number 5 because those two got converted into a number and then added together. If I skip the conversion itself, you'll see, let me just do this. And we're going to have x and we're going to have y. I'm going to get 23. Yeah, as you can see, I've got 23 instead because those two strings being joined together. And this is basically what you can do with the function node.
And that's pretty much all I can tell you right now about JavaScript. Now, I've linked a tutorial for the JavaScript itself in the description as well. Obviously, everything I just talked about is in the description as well in the form of an article if you're interested in that. If you want to learn more about the JavaScript itself, feel free. I'll link that tutorial for you so you could learn all the nooks and bits about the JavaScript. And next tutorial, it's gonna be about tips and tricks, things you can do in NodeRED to kind of get things done or improve your workflow, and well, maybe impress your friends as well. So that's gonna be the last part, 7th and the last part, and it's gonna be next Monday. So if you fancy this, just subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my media channels if you want to get notifications. And if you appreciate what I'm doing, you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. So I guess I'm gonna see you next Monday with this series and a little bit sooner with something else. Until then.